Hello, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening. Good day to all of you who are with us today in this webinar. I do hope that everyone is already registered and with us in this session. Maybe if we are still waiting for a few more participants to join, they can please do just inform them if they are your colleagues or friends to already log in and join our webinar for today. So warm greetings to all of you who are with us. My name is Jade Bata. I am a global well-being envoy from the Philippines, and it is our pleasure to have you join us in today's webinar entitled Algorithms and Cognitive Bias, Digital and Information Literacy in the Post-Truth World. A 2016 study analyzed around 400 million Facebook users' interactions with over 900 news outlets and found that people tend to seek information that aligns with their views. And it is no secret that social media and information platforms do tend to feed us information that syncs with our perspectives. How do we respond to social media algorithms? Are we guilty of using these information that aligns with our views to shape our opinion and further our actions? So today, we learn how social media algorithms and cognitive biases can affect our own media consumption. But before that, I'd like to introduce to you the organization that is instrumental in making this webinar possible. Reimagining Society is an international youth-led organization that aspires to create more inclusive, fair, and sustainable communities by holistically embedding the concept of well-being. The organization, with envoys and ambassadors all over the world, believes that the synergy of innovation and dynamism, partnership, and human development fosters a unique change. Thus, we support various like-minded individuals and organizations pushing for the realization of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development among the youth. Should you like to get in contact with us, please do not hesitate to like our Facebook page and drop us a message. Our Facebook page address is displayed on our slides right now, so you might just want to remember that. To formally begin our session, may I call on Ms. Gemma Soneja, a fellow Global Wellbeing Envoy, to introduce our speaker. Thank you. Ms. Gemma?
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to all our participants from all over the region. Thank you, Ms. Jade, for giving us a background of what Reimagining Society is all about. Ms. Jade Concepcion Bata is also one of the Reimagining Society's global well-being envoys from the Philippines. Before I introduce our speaker for today's webinar, we would like to give you some important reminders in the conduct of today's activity. The duration of our session will last for 1.5 hours. Post your comments and questions in our FB Live comment section. During the open forum, we will read your posts and our speaker will respond to them. We will accommodate relevant questions and comments within the time limit. We hope to see comments in the form of a reaction. You may want to post a sentence you heard which you like or a thought that resonated with you. Again, put everything in the comment section. E-certificates will be given after the participant has successfully completed answering the webinar feedback form. The feedback form link will be given a few minutes before the session ends. We hope you are seated comfortably as we formally begin our session. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to introduce to you our resource speaker for today's webinar. Professor Joven Rosario Castro is the Vice President for Academic Services, and former Director of Student Development of Far Eastern University. He is also a faculty of the Department of Communication, handling core communication and research courses. He is a media and information literacy or MIL advocate who has traveled in different parts of the country to train public school teachers on the integration of MIL into the curriculum under the auspices of the National Council for Children's Television of the Department of Education here in the Philippines. He is an alumnus of the International Visitor Leadership Program of the U.S. Department of State and had specialized training on MIL focusing on the information disorder. Professor Castro is a certified student affairs specialist who aims to promote a transformative student experience and a trainer of the Asian Debate Institute, a debate camp based in Chung-Ang University in Seoul, Korea. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Joven R. Castro. Sir?
Thank you very much, Gemma, for that generous introduction. And thank you very much, Reimagining Society, for the invitation. There is an I that lurks behind all that we do in social media, and that's reflected in my title slide. And that I can be considered as the algorithm. And such algorithm, when combined with cognitive bias, would have a lot of implications in the creation of a post-truth world. And because of that scenario, it is very imperative to strengthen digital and information literacy initiatives in different parts of the world. Definitely, there are already current initiatives, and that is an indication that the world recognizes fake information or infodemic as a major issue that we all have to collectively address. And therefore, if we want to reimagine our society, it should be one that is founded on truth, because the truth will lead us to more beneficial interactions integral to any democratic institution. I'd like to start my presentation by reflecting back on the panopticon. So this is the panopticon architecture, and it was created precisely for penal institutions or prison cells. The panopticon has a central tower, which you can see at the center, and there is a rotund or rotonda where the central tower can have an oversee or a big picture of what's happening in the rays or those lines or those structures that seem to form the rays of the sun. So Bentham, as a social theorist, and then eventually Foucault, mentioned that the panopticon is a resemblance of what the government can do to surveil on our daily activities. Now, if we push the analysis further, the panopticon also is relevant to the algorithms of social media. While we don't see the central tower that physically reflects control on our movements, the more dangerous part is it is an invisible central tower that gets to monitor whatever we do in our social media. Whatever our digital footprints are can be amalgamated or put together. And when these are put together, we become a commodity ourselves. So if you're familiar with Vincent Mosco, for example, who would tackle cybernetics ratings, it would mean that if you're not the one paying for a product, then you, the audience, is the product. So given this scenario, I'd like to share with you a famous line in a historical film in the Philippines titled General Luna. Negosyo o kalayaan, bayan o sarili, pumili ka. So business or freedom, country or self, you choose. I think that this line resonates with a lot of sentiments on the motivations of people who are engaged in the spread of infodemic. When we do this for business interests, this, or when we do this because we earn from being purveyors of fake information, what we do not realize is there are a lot of negative implications on our freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and eventually our country, especially democratic institutions, because when the engagements in social media are founded on untruth or not true information, then we have a problem on the quality of discourse itself. I'll push this analysis further in my succeeding discussions. So today, or this afternoon or this evening, the focal points of my presentation are these four concepts: algorithms, cognitive bias, post-truth itself, and the literacy that we need to strengthen, whether that's digital or informational. To frame properly our discussion today, please allow me to share with you some discussion tenets. Firstly, that the social media or the internet and media in general are a seat of power struggle or struggle for interests. So this means that there is engagement in social media because people have different interests at play. And when interests do conflict, then either the discourse is elevated or either the discourse itself is waylaid. So this kind of tenet or this tenet will further be resonated in my other discussions throughout my presentation. The second tenet I'd like to share is that the use of social media and all other apps has positive and negative consequences. In the words of Netflix's The Social Dilemma, it's a combination of both utopian and dystopian consequences. Thirdly, let us not forget that discourse is integral to democracy, that it's always a question of what is the quality of that discourse. Fourthly, let us recognize that for discourse to be meaningful, there are clash points, but it should not end there. For me, meaningful discourse is when there is a synthesis or a meeting point, even if we differ or disagree in several perspectives. So to start my presentation on the four concepts that we will learn today, let's talk about algorithm in social media. Matilsky defines algorithm as any mathematical calculation used to understand user habits and customize the social experience. So our social media, whether that's Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, would have an amalgamation of our habits every time we use them. And therefore, it gives the medium inputs to customize the way we engage with the social media. So our user habits are customized by ranking them, filtering them, and organizing them so that we, the social media users, can have a content that reflects our beliefs, preferences, and motivations. So they put all together the previous activities in social media, make sense out of our data or our activities, and then feed information, feed posts on our personal accounts. Now, why is this necessary in the social media? It's because there is a stiff competition on audience attention. If you look at the dynamics or engagement in social media, there is a flurry of massive information. In fact, we will get lost in the barrage of information and multimodal texts. So algorithms can make our lives easier by filtering this information for us and feeding us with the information that we desire based on our motivations and even our cognitive biases. So at head start, this seems okay, but in the long term, it has some negative ramifications. So in analyzing the algorithms and social media engagement itself, it is important that your digital footprint, whatever you do in social media, is searchable. So anyone in the world can see your posts, especially if you did not customize the settings of your social media account. It is eternal. It is there forever. And it can be used in favor or against you depending on what you posted online. It's replicable because others can share whatever you post online. And there is a global invisible audience that can see whatever your digital footprints are. And if I may add, there is also a global invisible technocratic expert who makes sense out of our uses of the social media and feed us with the content that resonates with our preferences. So let's take a look at Facebook, for example. This is how its algorithm works. It's engagement based, and by that we mean how frequent are you interacting with the other posts of your circle of or network of friends? How frequent do you hide content, especially, for example, the ads that keep on popping up in your account? So, for example, you purchased a product or liked a certain product, you will be surprised later on. Similar products get to boomerang back to you, and that tells you that the algorithm has started to read your interaction and your preference. Then, of course, your level of engagement with the post. How long do you engage with the post? How many comments do you post? When there is a video, do you watch the video from beginning to end? So for the business entities, when there is lower relevance, meaning there is low audience engagement with the post made by a company, it becomes costly for that company because the company needs to pay in order for, let's say, that advertisement to be boosted or to be promoted to the target audience. So for those of you who have their own businesses, when you want your product or service to be promoted, there is a fee that there's a corollary fee, and the wider the reach that you'd like to have, the more expensive it can get. But of course, comparing the expenses in social media versus doing it in the legacy media or the mainstream traditional media that we used to have, let's say 10 years ago, the expenses in social media is still less costly. Then Facebook claims to be more personal interaction focused, meaning how you interact with family members and friends are given the priority over other interactions that you do or we do. Now, the social media Twitter has this algorithm. It shows first the most relevant tweets. And by relevant here, the metrics are recency, engagement, rich media, and activity. So by recency, whichever you engage with, the latest will be pushed up. Whichever content that you keep on retweeting, clicking, or liking, or one that you browse through quickly, it will be pushed up. Whenever you use media that is multimodal, meaning it includes images, videos, and GIFs, then that will also be pushed up. In other words, your activity on Twitter, the span of time, the number of followers, and the extent of use will be calculated, and whatever appears in your own dashboard reflects the calculation that the algorithm has done. For Instagram, so I'm just choosing some of the popular social media platforms, at least in the Philippines. It's possible that in our neighboring countries and in the region, there are other more popular social media. The point is, whichever social media that we use, there is an algorithm that calculates these things. So in Instagram, the first metric is relationship. It bumps up your posts from accounts that you frequently interact. So similar to Facebook and Twitter, it's the frequency. And interest. People who engage as well with your posts are more likely to see your posts. So it's a network or circle where we interact with like-minded individuals. And of course, the timeliness. How frequent do you use it? How long are you in a particular post? How many accounts have you followed, etc. Lastly, on YouTube, impressions click-through rate. So this means that your clicks on a video thumbnail after seeing it is recorded vis-a-vis the time you consume or the time you allocate to watch a video. When these are calculated, you will see recommendations from YouTube, and you will realize that if you watch a particular theme, YouTube suddenly recommends videos with that similar theme. So it did not happen because YouTube randomly picked a video. The videos that you watch on YouTube, similar to any of the previous videos you watch, is already a calculation of your motivations, beliefs, etc., or your preferences. In other words, if you look at this slide, the ones on your, what's this? On my left, or the upper one, will be the benefits of algorithm, and the ones on the lower box will be the detriments. So the value of algorithm includes giving us the focus on options amid the information overload. So as I mentioned a while ago, there is so much information, we don't have the time really to narrow this down. So what the algorithm does is it narrows down this information for us, aligned with its calculation of our motivations, beliefs, and whatever we have clicked throughout our engagement. When it has narrowed down these options, it gives us the impression that this is our informed choice about a lot of complex subjects. So what that means is that given again the flurry of information, it takes time for us to integrate, to distill, to find out what is most relevant. So by focusing or narrowing it down for us, it is a reflection of what we are or who we are, at least in our social media engagement. I say at least a reflection of who we are in social media, because who we are in social media is not necessarily our self in the non-virtual world. If you're familiar with concepts such as the alter world, for example, there is a behavior and a virtual or an avatar in, let's say, Twitter that gives people their persona online, which is totally different from their persona in face-to-face or non-mediated life. And algorithms will always say that whatever we view, whatever content that is fed to us is a reflection of who we are. And to an extent, you might get to reflect, is this really me? Or is this what the algorithm has made me think to be me? And that's a contentious issue. Is it a reflection of who we are, or is it a creation of who can we become? So the detriments are, if you look at this, the lower box, it puts too much control in the hands of corporations. So in this case, in the hands of information technology conglomerates, and of course, the government. So if you live in Singapore, for example, or in central business districts where CCTV cameras are everywhere, those information, the data captured by those CCTV cameras can be amalgamated to surveil on us. And it can be argued that it's meant for our security. And if there is nothing to hide about our identity, and that if we have a clean record, criminal record, for example, then that capturing of our images and whereabouts should be a non-issue. So at first glance, that seems okay because we feel safe. But are we really safe? When there are CCTV cameras laid down on top of us, do we still behave authentically, or do we behave according to the expectations of the powers that be? Now, what is so wrong if you behave according to the expectations of the powers that be? Doesn't this encroach on our concept of freedom? How important is that freedom over a collective consciousness to have national security, for example? So there is a lot of debate, and we hope that throughout our conversation today, we get to hear several perspectives from the audience. If you have insights about that, you can post them, or maybe in the Q&A portion later on. Another detriment of the algorithm is that it will perpetuate your bias and create filter bubbles. So if you keep on hearing, seeing the same thing over and over again, what happens to your psyche? What happens to your ability to engage with other people? When it reinforces your biases, will you still be open for contrarian views? And when you are close minded, I think that's the detriment of meaningful discourse. Because in any democratic society, multiplicity of ideas should be celebrated. But if you only want to hear what supports your needs and motivations, then you ask yourself, what about the other entities who have similar, parallel needs and motivations? Can't we not meet halfway so that society becomes more inclusive? So if the filter bubble is only supportive of your own needs, obviously it's exclusionary. Then other people who may need assistance, who may need government assistance, will not be reached out to because of that filter bubble or biases. Lastly, the detriment is it will cut choices, creativity, and serendipity. Meaning, when we engage in a natural, quote unquote, environment and we get to discover things that are outside our comfort zone and our motivations, that spells or generates creativity. But if everything is predictable and you get to see, hear, listen to the same thing over and over again, definitely creativity is stunted. So we need to deal with varied points of view to create a new one. Because if we all think alike, then the world will be very boring. Imagine if you all look like me, think like me, the world will be very boring. So on to the second concept of my presentation, cognitive bias. So cognitive bias is the natural inclination for or against an idea, object, group, or individual. It is the repeated patterns of thinking that can lead to inaccurate or unreasonable conclusions. It is shaped by an interplay of variables such as socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, educational background, political affiliation, etc. In other words, our cognitive bias did not materialize, or cognitive biases were not nurtured overnight. Our cognitive biases were formed by several years of engagement with a lot of forces or variables. So when you come from a poor family, for example, when you are less educated, when you would depend on, we call it in the Philippines as ayuda or dole out from the government, that will have a lot of impact on the way you view the world. So if you feel that the government is your messiah that should pluck you out of poverty, that will have implications as well on how you will defend the government, and that will have implications on how you view whether the government is doing its job or not. So I'm sharing that scenario because even if there is no social media, the cognitive and the algorithms of social media, the cognitive bias has been shaped by these factors and more likely just reinforced by the social media. So to further that discussion, these are some examples of cognitive bias. Confirmation bias, or the tendency to favor information that confirms your beliefs. So if you support a certain political party for, let's say, the past 15 years, you will not, because also your parents or your ancestors supported that political party, you just cannot get out of the wings of that party. You will support that because there is a family lineage. It has been generational. So even if, let's say, through your education, you got to be exposed to a different political spectrum, maybe you will become a moderate, but maybe because you value the family, especially in Asia, where close family ties are highly favored, you will not easily go out of that political inclination or bolt out of it because of the factors beyond the social media engagement or beyond even your education. There is also what we call as the anchoring bias, which depends heavily on one piece of information and ignores the other facets. So for example, this means that even if your defense for a party or an issue will have multiple arguments or facets, you tend to ignore the other facets because you only want to focus on the facet that supports your cognitive bias. So if you are an advocate, for example, of, let's say, divorce, you will not factor in arguments pertaining to the role of the children in any marital relationship because you have been focused on the need to address the irreparable differences, the irreconcilable differences between the husband and the wife, and you will not factor in at all that other part of the argumentation. So you have you have anchored your bias on what's favorable to the direction of your argumentation. Then of course the false consensus effect refers for your tendency to overestimate people's agreement with your own ideas or beliefs. So just because they liked your post or you gained 100,000 likes, for example, that is already a hasty generalization that people love what you're doing. The sad part about cognitive bias is that it can create an echo chamber. Now, what is an echo chamber? It is an ecosystem where a person only encounters information or opinions that reflect and reinforce their own. So if you look at the diagram in this slide, you will see that the symbol I used for cognitive biases are now interlinked until they formed a circle, and they are interlinked by the central figure, the symbol I used for algorithms. And because it's a circle connecting all these cognitive biases, there's no way out of it. It has become an echo chamber. So if you go to a cave, for example, and you speak, it echoes your own voice, whatever you have said. That's how it works. The cave is an echo. It's a chamber. It echoes back whatever you're thinking. And that's what algorithms do. They re-echo, they echo, they repeat whatever you all think. And as mentioned a while ago, when you all think alike, contrarian views are unwelcome at all. If you have the time, I highly recommend that you download this article made by Ong and Cabañez, the architects of networked disinformation. It's a very salient study on how information disorder was orchestrated during an election in the Philippines. It covered interviews with those who have been involved in the spread of disinformation during the election in the Philippines. And one of the very interesting insights in this research is this line, which explains the corrosive or vitriolic discourse in the Philippine social media. The author said, Duterte's critics are right to point out the increased vitriol in online political discussions among Filipinos. What this moral panic ignores, however, is the very discontent that Duterte supporters are expressing. Their angry tone is a resounding rejection of the politics of decency that they associate with oligarchic elite political establishment, which they feel has not brought about any palpable change in their everyday lives. For those of you who are non-Filipinos, our friends from the other countries and in the Asian continent, our poor people who comprise majority of the electorate in this interesting insight have been allegedly used during elections, and they have not, or the quality of their lives have not improved even with the leadership of the previous presidents of the country, whom they think come from the decent oligarchic families, and that when they saw President Duterte, who speaks like them, and with no harm and pun intended, a language that is considered as gutter language, one who would mention profane words in the media, they saw a certain semblance in his persona, someone who reflects their sentiments and their ways of life. And it's a revolution from the oligarchic, decent languaging and way of administration. And because of that experience, despite our despite our democratic traditions in the country, because there was no economic upliftment, they feel that they needed a new administration that will bring them out of poverty. Now, of course, the crucial question in the Philippines is, has the current administration improved the lives of our people, at least economically? And it's a highly debatable argument, because if you go to several parts of the country, you will still see the same poverty. And instead of, for example, focusing on what economic initiatives have been done to improve the plight of the people, there's always a point finger to previous administrations. And therefore, the plight of these poor people would still be sad and very dismal in terms of government approach. Of course, there's still a few years for the current government to initiate programs or to strengthen programs. But then again, the COVID-19 pandemic hit all of us. So that devastated a lot of poor people. And in social media, though, you will still see a lot of support to the government, a high satisfaction rating for our current administration despite that. And you begin to ask yourself, why? Why so? How so? So in the Philippines, and more likely in most of our countries, because of the echo chambers, because of polarized conversations, what we have is a more divisive society. So you will see that the two echo chambers are not meeting together. There is no touch point. They have been separated by these symbols reflecting, sadly, a dichotomous political affiliation. The one with this fist is coming from the Duterte. The one with this symbol would come from the Liberal Party. And I started my presentation by asking, what about the Philippines? Where do we see the Philippines in this semiotic analysis? When we only see the political parties involved, but how do we work together to improve the quality of life in the Philippines? And maybe if this happens as well in your respective countries, given the political division and polarization, where is the meeting point? And that's what we need to look for. So algorithm plus cognitive biases will conjure up a post-truth world. And what does this mean? Post-truth is an assertion of ideological supremacy by its practitioners who try to compel someone to believe something regardless of the evidence. So the evidence takes the back seat because the priorities are to create the fiction. The distinction between what is true and what is not is no longer relevant. In fact, news organizations, which are considered as institutional truth creators or purveyors, these institutions are questioned so that they will lose the public trust, especially if those who are in power are attacked by these news organizations in their reports, meaning criticizing those who are in political power. So there is a premium on emotions, a play up on emotions, to the point that the quality of argumentation goes to the gutter, to the point that truth is set aside in favor of those emotional tendencies or emotional expressions. This is an example of a post, a screen grab of several users in social media sometime in March or April, if I'm not mistaken. This was the time when the Philippines was clamoring better leadership from the administration in fighting COVID. And this happened when there was a clamor to close our borders to our Chinese workers or visitors. And when that was trending on Twitter and on Facebook, these posts suddenly popped up. And you will see that all of them have the same script, the same line. And more likely, the analysis here is these are either troll accounts or these are paid individuals who have to create an echo chamber so that people will believe that the current president is doing well in managing the crisis. And of course, the issue of the entry of Chinese visitors and workers, despite the ban for the same nationalities in other parts of the world. I highly encourage everyone to watch The Social Dilemma. It's a documentary on Netflix. It can give you disturbing analysis on what our social media have done in the quality of interaction, in preying on our activities. And from a larger scale, the disadvantages are these. There is a massive negative impact on discourse. There is withdrawal from public debates because if the discourse is corrosive or below the belt, those intellectuals who may contribute positively and meaningfully in the discourse would rather not engage, because if they mention contrarian views, the trolls or those who are paid to create that echo chamber would attack them below the belt, not argue with these good individuals, good arguers in terms of the merits of the issue, but they would attack them um, using character assassination. So for example, in the Philippines, we had a critic of the administration, journalist Maria Ressa, who was eventually character assassinated by trolls telling her that they would ask people to rape her, etc. And of course, she did not back down from the discourse, but based on scenarios in the Philippines, her criticisms have led to her incarceration. She was jailed. Of course, she was able to go out for via bail, but the case is still prospering. And the point is, when critics who would give you the other dimension of the issue are attacked, it can create a chilling effect on them and not contribute significantly to the discourse. And therefore, those who have the louder voice, but not necessarily the most meaningful and insightful voice, would win over the critics who would no longer want to engage. Facts by convenience has become a norm. So if you have a society that allows alternative facts, that allows misinformation, disinformation to prosper because they feel that the information is conducive to their needs and interests, then what kind of society do we have? If it is anchored on false information, what comes or what happens to decisions? How can you make quality decisions when the entire picture of, let's say, the issue is not laid down on the table by the government? And if we perform based on distrust, even those who would like to engage and contribute to this discussion will also again back out. Now, the more dangerous one, as mentioned in the Netflix social dilemma documentary, is when the polarization is not addressed, it's likely that civil unrest might happen. So you would see, for example, some traces in the United States when the supporters of President Trump would question the election results to be fraudulent. And then the other party would question that if there is no way to navigate or to have a meeting point, there could be unnecessary clashes in the United States. And we can see the same thing in the Philippines or maybe in your countries. When the discourse in social media is corrosive, below the belt, it's verbal violence. And you begin to ask yourself, is this the society that we'd like to imagine? People who have no respect for differing opinions. Hence, digital and information literacy is all the more integral, necessary. And my definition of DIL is the agency to take control of choosing, evaluating, and using information from multiple reputable sources for personal growth and for helping create a nurturing community of digital and information literate citizens. And for me, these are 4 things we can do to apply DIL. So as teachers, for example, we can ask our students to do their digital footprint inventory. So this means that we can ask our students to do a screen grab of their screen time with their consent, of course, with the goal only of understanding where do our students focus their attention to in their social media use or in the use of the other apps. And promoting moderation as a policy, for example, at home or even in school, if you get to see students using their social media for 6 hours a day, that's already an alarm button for us to reorient the students to do more outside of the social media. So even the creators of the different social media platforms, as featured in Netflix's The Social Dilemma, they would always say, reduce the engagement in social media. In fact, there was a recommendation that social media access should be given to their kids when they reach middle school, and that below the middle school, they should not be allowed to have the social media access. And these are the people who created those platforms. Now, on the second recommendation, I suggest that we gamify our account settings and engagement. So to skirt around algorithm, we must like pages that are contrarian to our own political beliefs. We must like and engage with ideas or posts that disagree with us. Because if the social media captures that engagement, then our news feeds will also be given with the multiple perspectives or the contrarian views included. Now, this is important because if we want to break out of the echo chamber, then we have to be part of the echo chamber of the other entities so that we get to understand where they are coming from. Again, as mentioned, we may be different in terms of perspectives, but there has to be a conscious initiative to find that meeting point. The clash points are inevitable, but we have to find that synthesis or meeting point. Reduced notification is another recommendation. So if you love shopping, try to reduce the notification so that you won't overburden yourself with the pressure of clicking and clicking the shopping platform. Or create some household policies, for example, that during lunchtime or mealtime, the phone should be away so that you can create conversations with the family outside the realm of the virtual world. Or 2 hours before sleep, leave your mobile phones at the sala so that in the bedroom there is no distraction. And that's also a way for the algorithm to detect that at this time you do not want to be disturbed by the content that it wants to feed you. But more importantly, at school and even at home, we have to practice multiple perspectives or broad-based information. Teaching our students how to select credible sources, asking them to validate, to vet the information using multiple sources is a tedious task, but it will work a lot. It will train them to consider several perspectives before they can make a final point of view or a final argument. So I personally do that in my classroom. Before they submit a position paper or a position statement, it must go through the process of vetting, factoring in the different perspectives. It's hard, but the process of making them understand that there are multiple viewpoints and you have to sift through them, distill them until you come up with a cogent argument is far more important than just simply making a statement. Now, in terms of pressuring different entities outside of our realm, let's say the classroom or in the family, it is high time to pressure information technology companies to have that greater accountability. So I will have examples in a while. So these four initiatives and actions can help us combat alternative facts. And for example, but before that, let's understand the ecosystem, at least in the United States. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act highlights that internet companies are not legally responsible for the content they host if it was published there by someone else, and that platforms can't be held liable if they take down any content they or their users consider obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable. Simply put, this is a safeguard for the social media, and it celebrates their self-governance. So instead of governments telling them what to do, they have a self-regulatory mechanism to just take down content that is against community standards. So every time we join any social media account, we have to read very carefully the community standards, the terms and conditions. So these are outlined. And of course, the natural tendency when the community standard is so lengthy, you will just agree, not realizing that there can be some provisions that will use your data. Fortunately, our social media platforms have become more proactive in terms of suspending accounts that promote inauthentic online behavior. So there is, of course, a recognition that some posts are orchestrated and that violates the authentic engagement that Twitter, for example, promotes. So Twitter suspended several accounts because they have violated Twitter's platform manipulation and spam policies. Facebook took down some accounts in the Philippines linked to the Philippine military and police, saying that these are fake accounts targeting mainly Filipino users. Facebook, for example, has recently sued Ensar Sahintork for scraping people's publicly visible information from Instagram in order to create a network of clone sites. The point I'm trying to make is we need the tech companies to address fake news, to address misbehavior online, because if we just do it individually, it will take time and the impact could not be as large as when the tech company itself does its role in promoting its social responsibility and ensuring that engagement is authentic and outside the realm of those who promote fake information. In our country, the Philippines, and most likely in your country, there are national laws that govern social media use. So these are some: the online sexual harassment law, cyberbullying law, cyber libel, data privacy law. So most countries would have the same laws, and these are helpful in terms of influencing the behavior of people online, the need to respect the digital rights of other social media users. Because of our social consciousness, you will see, for example, Instagram apologizing to this model when it was taken down because of this post, but Instagram users clamored that it's racist and it's body shaming this model when Instagram did not take down similar posts, but poses made by slim or quote unquote sexier models. So if we are socially aware, socially conscious about what we can do, we can pressure these companies or social media platforms to be more inclusive, to respect diversity and bodily autonomies, at least in the case of this model. Facebook also had to pay $550 million to settle a facial recognition lawsuit. So again, issues on privacy in the United States is highly contentious, and because of the misuse of facial recognition data, Facebook had to settle and pay this large amount. Of course, for us, this is already large, but for a $1 billion or $1 trillion industry like Facebook, this is still small. But at least it shows that people are conscious about our digital rights, and we can make tech companies liable for actions contrary to digital wellness and respect for our digital data. In the Philippines, still as a part of our social consciousness, there are NGOs, youth-initiated groups such as Out of the Box, that promote initiatives to counter fake news. So it's one good website for you to access learning resources and some strategies to promote media and information literacy. For our friends from India, this is a site initiated also by some IVLP fellows from India, the smartizens.org, and it can also give you learning kits on how to promote digital wellness, at least for the kids. In my own university, we have the Tama Rao, the anti-infodemic campaign of FEU. So Tama Rao is actually an endemic animal in the Philippines, which is also our sports icon. But we made a different meaning for the word Tama Rao, because in Filipino, it also means, is it the truth? So in our classrooms, when students create a project that has relevance to the fight against the infodemic, such as this, for example, we publish it in that Facebook page, and it's carried on by the Department of Communication. Every time our course, Communication, Society, and Culture, has a module dedicated to fighting infodemic, and the outputs of the students, the selected students, are published to create more campaigns and to engage our students in the fight against fake news or information disorder. Now, it's important to note that education or educating our students may be a long cut, but even if it's the long cut solution to the problem, the beauty of it is we engage more individuals who would join us in the advocacy. And if we cannot stop trolls and purveyors of fake news to do their thing, at least we create or develop people who will help us fight against that challenge. In the classroom, these are also some things we can still do. To ask our students to really read. That's the problem currently. If they do not read a lot, the tendency is to just read one multiple source, and that simply repeats the problem because they just read one source. So even when we design our syllabi, it is important to provide multiple sources for a particular focal point, because at least they get to decide which of these points of view should they follow in terms of the position that they will take, but going through the process of reading all of them to ensure that it's multi-perspective in approach. Then the second one, it's a step that we use in debate. We call it the MEAT, main idea, explanation, example, tie-up. Every time a student explains something, either through essays or through class recitations, we ask them to follow these steps, because the explanation and example forces, quote unquote, the student to attach an example to back up an analysis. It cannot be an assertion where students would just say anything but not backed up by any evidence. And then that evidence, of course, we have to teach them how to select from credible sources, will have to be tied up to the analysis. So it takes a different session for that, but at least when we have a structure in the classroom and our students are oriented to follow that structure, they know that for the truth to come out, it goes through a process, a verification process. Just like our journalists, there is an editorial process before news is published. And not everyone can be a journalist because they cannot and do not do that editorial process, that filtering process, that vetting process, that this is accurate, that this is truthful. Last two, I think that when clash points are inevitable, the synthesis should also be inevitable. And that's the more difficult part. When we thrive in our own echo chamber, we seem to be living in a separate, distant world. But how do we put them together? That practice in the classroom of finding a meeting point is crucial because it can retrain our students and even us that amidst the clash of perspectives, there is always a meeting point. And when that meeting point is found and nurtured, then that can facilitate understanding between these two warring parties. Of course, teaching students how to deconstruct myths in the classroom, like patriarchy, for example. It can be deconstructed in several ways. That it's not true that men, for example, are more powerful than women. That can be deconstructed as socially made or socially constructed, and that there should be equity and equality among those debates related to the tension and relationship among genders, not just men and women. I bring back the question previously. Business or freedom, self or country? You choose. And I hope we choose freedom, and I hope we choose our country. I end my presentation by saying, let's take control of our social media life by understanding algorithms and moderating them according to our own will and retaining utmost respect for the digital rights of others. More importantly, let's go beyond the personal and take on the challenge of fighting the invisible powers that be, who, because of their interests, seem to be willing to sacrifice democratic principles by allowing a social media configuration that facilitates the spread of infodemic. Discourse, a key element of democratic participation, is only meaningful and useful when conversations are founded on facts and reasonable analysis. And despite the clash points during a discourse, I hope that we will always find a synthesis or a common ground that benefits all of us and our countries in general. Thank you very much, and I hope you have learned something today. Salamat po.
Thank you very much, Sir Joven. That was very insightful. And I'm very sure they did not learn just something. They learned a lot from your topic based from the interactions that we have in our FB live feed. And so we give way now to the open forum for the question and answer part of this activity. Okay. You explained a while ago the meaning of social media algorithms, and you told us that there is algorithms in social media because of stiff competitions in audience participation and interaction. Just for the benefit of reinforcement, can you tell us again what are the purposes of these social media algorithms?
Because of the information overload, the social media companies need to filter this information for the users so that the users will not get lost in the ocean of information. So the algorithm will work that way by documenting, calculating the likes and the engagement that one does in social media. And therefore, if they have sensed a pattern of use, more or less that gives them a calculation of the motivations or preferences to the user. So it's boomerang to or back to the user. So the user starts to see the same thing related to preferences and motivation. So that's the promise of the algorithm. It will make our lives easier. Instead of sifting through a lot of information, it will do it for us.
Will it be safe also to say that it's for business purposes also of these tech companies? Yeah. Okay. Second question will be, how does social media algorithm enhance or diminish the user's social media experience?
In terms of enhancement, as I've said, it makes your experience more easy or easier because you don't have to sift through the information. So it's like asking someone to synthesize a report for you, and then you will just read the synthesis part. The diminishing part of that configuration, though, is you don't get other perspectives because you're fed the same information over and over again. And therefore, your knowledge and your argumentation can be slim because you did not factor in the other perspective. So in terms of depth, in terms of inclusivity, your argumentation, the way you experience the social world will be limited to your own network, to your own filter bubble.
Do you think that the social media algorithms contribute to the proliferation of misinformation or disinformation in social media? And to follow that up, what are the regulatory measures one can put forward, or are there regulatory measures already in place?
What algorithms does is to strengthen the echo chamber. So all those within that echo chamber will have access to the fake information spread by anyone who's part of that echo chamber. So in other words, those who think alike and have been calculated to be part of the echo chamber will get to hear, see, or watch fake information. So it contributes within that circle, and when they share it even to outside of their circle, then it will be the fake information will be spread. But I don't think it's algorithm itself that that strengthens fake information. There will be some literature who would trace it back to polarized societies because of partisanship. And of course, the cognitive biases would factor in. In other words, even without the technology, of course, it magnified the extent of the problem, then the fake information, the information disorder will still be there because of the motivations of the people who would like to spread them. There have been initiatives in different countries to fact check, and even Facebook has partnered with different organizations worldwide to help in the fact-checking mechanisms, and even to promote an inclusive, nurturing community. So there are features on Facebook where you can report fake information or violent violent content, etc. So there are initiatives already.
You mentioned about fact checking. There is a question here from one of our participants in from the registration form. His question is, what are the roles of fact checkers in the spread of misinformation proliferated by conspiracy theorists?
Okay, if the information disorder is proliferated by conspiracy theorists, the fact checkers still need to pinpoint the hidden agenda of these conspiracy theorists. And to pinpoint that, then it's always strategic to be fact-based and science-based, for example, at least in the case of the COVID pandemic. So I think one corollary question or analysis to that is, why do conspiracy theories do arise? So usually literature will tell you that when there is uncertainty on information, those who have hidden agenda will promote a certain misinformation or spread a certain misinformation to forward their agenda. So for example, this is, of course, an oversimplistic analysis. For someone who, let's say, sells a particular medical product or a medical equipment that they would say would help address the COVID-19 virus, then they would say that this will work and that one will not work, just so they can push for their agenda. So fact checkers can always question that using science, for example. So I think we have one in the Philippines. I cannot remember the term, when you have to, through a steam, you have to cover your face, and then the steam can help dispel the virus. So those things can be promoted by those who have that agenda because they probably want to sell that kind of initiative, or maybe they want to contribute to the solution, not realizing that they are promoting an idea that is not safe and has no scientific evidence.
If that is the case, how can our participants promote realistic and positive exchange of ideas and opinions through their social media, despite the negative dynamics of its algorithms directed towards their own gains?
Yeah, the authentic behavior in social media should be continued. So by authentic, I mean let's engage the way we still engage, but we have to gamify the platform. And the recommendation, as I've mentioned, is to like pages that have contrarian views, engage with people who disagree with you, hide ads that you don't like, so that you get to be fed with different information. And that's a shortcut way. The long way really is to have media and information literacy in the classroom as early as the elementary grade, when students or pupils have to be taught the importance of promoting truth and honesty and
Yeah.
accuracy. Because when our kids are trained, when they grow up and they have imbibed the importance of truth, accuracy, and honesty, when they encounter these types of information, it becomes a non-negotiable value, and they will say, I will not agree with this. In fact, I will flag it, I will report it as untruth, because based on what I've learned in science classes when I was in the elementary grade, that's not what the gasoline does when you, let's say, use it as a disinfectant. It has a lot of negative implications on my health, etc. So it takes some stock knowledge, it takes some scientific approaches, at least in the elementary level, and then up to when they reach their college, when there's a conscious effort in most, if not all, universities to counter the problem. Then even if it's the long cut solution, at least it's more sustainable, I think.
And I agree. You discussed quite extensively about cognitive biases a while ago. Do you think we can avoid our cognitive biases in our consumption of media and information?
That's a very difficult question, because cognitive biases include an interplay of socio-economic and political factors. So even if we do something in social media, meaning report, engage with contrarian views, etc., we have to hit the heart of the issue, which is, for example, social justice, the need to provide or promote the economic well-being of our people. And once our people feel that the government really genuinely care for their economic welfare, the creation of livelihood programs, etc., that will can spell a difference in the way their cognitive biases are formed. What we can only do, at least from the education's point of view, is to provide these multiple perspectives when they are in the university. But for those who cannot even go to college, how do we help them? And of course, from our end as a university, there can be community immersion programs, but that cannot be sustainable. I mean, for progress to happen in terms of the discourse, we have to meet as well the economic needs of our people. And of course, I'm not running for the presidency. It's a government thing, but of course,
Yeah.
some initiatives that NGOs and all concerned citizens can do, which have been proven to be effective. I mean, during the recent typhoon, we have seen how citizen action has helped the needy, and we didn't even have to wait for the government. But the part of the government to act, the government's action has to complement the citizens' action. And in fact, the government must do more.
And that emphasizes again the important role of the different institutions of our society.
Correct.
Yeah. There are articles about cognitive biases that were published in Harvard Business Review and Psychology Today that tells us that our cognitive biases result in our poor decision making. How can we outsmart our own biases when it comes to our media consumptions?
Gamify it. There has to be, again, at least in the education sector, the need to emphasize multiple perspectives, the need to read sources from reputable organizations, let's say that Harvard Business Review or the journals, and providing people access to this information, maybe distilling the information, summarizing them for them if they do not have the time to read them will help, because we can never change that cognitive bias unless we engage with them in terms of content, in terms of time. And I will again bring back my Marxist argument: hit the economic base, address it so that they can engage in better discourse because they don't have to problematize their livelihood, what they have to eat. And now, if once that is addressed, then we can start to deepen the discourse and to deepen it, even if you have cognitive biases. If an expert tells you a research-based output, then you can reconsider, and then you keep on engaging them in the same process over and over again. Science is a good springboard to change cognitive biases. When you show them the detriments of and we don't even need science for this, the denudation of forests and how it has impacted some provinces in the Philippines that caused flash floods. They have personally experienced it, and someone has to push them to contribute in the reforestation project, pressuring the government to protect the Sierra Madre ranges, etc. So sometimes even the social experience that are drastic and devastating can push people to change their biases. That, let's say, we do not have to be resilient in these types of tragedy, but push for accountability in the government to do more, and even private multinational corporations that explore, extract our resources.
I am out of words because you are also giving us ideas and insights far beyond about media consumption and our role in the media world or in the social media world. One more question, Sir Joven. When Oxford Dictionary named post-truth their word of the year in 2016, does it always have to relate with politics, do you think?
It does not have to relate all the time with politics, but of course, political issues are the noisiest, and more likely post-truth refer to it, but it can cut across a lot of topics like gender issues. There are a lot of myths that must be deconstructed, and those myths have been there for several decades or even centuries ago because someone benefits from them. And by deconstructing that, you create a different discourse or conversation on the inequality, and such should therefore be addressed by bringing that up in the conversation table. So it cuts across several topics.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sir Joven, for the very rich insights that you shared with us. We are sorry to cut now our open forum in the interest of time. We will now, the link for the feedback form has been sent in the comment section of our FB Live feed. Please do not forget to answer them today so you can receive your e-certificate for this webinar. We learned so much today, right? And allow me to distill 3 things that stood out in our discussion apart from the other insights that was shared to us by our speaker. We were reminded that in order for us to make informed choices, we should read and explore and expose ourselves to multiple perspectives, even those that we are not so much inclined into. As what Professor Joven tells it, gamify your news feed. And he even reminded us to read, and read, and how it pays to read. Second, we heard of the reiteration of the call to retaining utmost respect for the digital rights of others, despite our differences in our views and cognitive biases. And finally, may this topic help us to take control very well of our social media life by understanding algorithms and moderating them according to your own fair judgment and will. And so, before we end our session, we will award the certificate of appreciation to our resource speaker. And I read. Certificate of Appreciation is proudly presented to Joven R. Castro in grateful acknowledgement of his expertise, professional competence, and invaluable service rendered as resource speaker during the Reimagining Society's webinar entitled Algorithms and Cognitive Bias, Digital and Information Literacy in the Post-Truth World, given this 21st day of November 2020. Signed by Sudesh Pokhrel, Executive Administrative Director, MD Talibur Islam, Executive Strategic Director, Mohit Sirohi, Executive Operational Director, and Dr. Reed Allen S. Ugsang, Executive Technical Director. Again, thank you very much, Professor Joven Castro, for gracing our event for today. And to all our participants, thank you for joining us today. Please do not forget to check and click the link to the webinar's feedback form and fill it out today. Your feedback matters. This is Reimagining Society. Now signing off. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you.